suggesting that most people prefer to play a6. So I have noticed occasionally some top players experimenting with e5. So after a6, an a4 by Adams. Well, to be honest, he plays almost everything in the main position of the knight off. In recent times, he's played bishop e3, he's played bishop d3. After a4, Black can consider going for a dragon variation with g6, since the addition of a6, a4 rules out a lot of the queenside castling variations. But of course, Black can also go e5 or e6, and they're getting to normal Scheveningen positions as well. And knight c6 is not a bad move either. So Kamer has to decide what he's going to go for. It's certainly nothing new. Beliavsky was the player who made a4 into a serious weapon. Well, Adams is just the right sort of player to use it to create some sort of bind. So that's, well, e5 has been played. And now instead of knight b3, knight f3 is played. So White's idea is to put a bishop on c4 and have a retreat square. And occasionally knight g5 can be annoying. The knight doesn't seem great on f3, but in some lines it can go knight d2, knight c4 as well. So, well, both players are playing fairly quickly. I'm absolutely sure this is all preparation. So we will see how this goes. But ultimately, it's supposed to be absolutely fine for Black, and we'll see if Kamer can prove it. I'm waiting to see if Adams can find just a small advantage to start on some sort of grind. Okay, we're going to move on now to the Anton Wojtaszek game, which looked like it was going to be similar, except on move 4, White played queen takes d4. It's never really been a fully respectable line, although Mikhail Tal, the former world champion, did have a lovely win against Robert Byrne, I believe, the American player, many years back. And that, well, it never gained great heights of popularity. It can be annoying. If knight c6, White is going to go bishop b5 and pin the knight. So if knight c6, bishop b5, and, well, you can go bishop d7 or you can go queen d7. Queen d7 probably well answered by knight c3, but bishop d7, we take on c6, and White can choose between c4 based plans or just knight c3 or even bishop g5 ideas. So to avoid the bishop g5 ideas, Wojtaszek started with knight f6. And now e5 is not really very effective, I don't think. You know, I'm pretty sure you can just take it and allow the swap of queens. But, well, instead, he chooses bishop g5. So knight c6, he can certainly go bishop b5, and he did, and then came bishop d7. And this is a slightly different position than the one you usually get. You would expect White now to take on f6, take on c6 and then take on f6 and try to play with the knights against the bishops. And sometimes that can work really well. Of course, sometimes it can rebound. You do have the option of moving your queen away, but there's no perfect square here. Queen d2 loses the e4 pawn, so you'd think you might drop in on d3, but then you've got to be careful about knight b4 ideas. So normally you would take that knight on c6, but in fact, he has played queen d3. And we have a line of the queen takes d4 system that is a little bit unusual. Here, Black would like to go g6, but usually bishop takes f6 then is good. So you usually finish up playing e6 and then bishop e7, and then White will take on f6 and try and win the d6 pawn, or that's often the way it goes. So after queen d3, a really interesting idea by Wojtaszek, which is knight g4, trying to make the bishop on g5 look silly and thinking about knight e5. So White can again think about taking on c6. Not sure that it's necessarily that great, but yeah, the knight will not be stable on e5. Sure, it will knock the queen around, but after we swap, if you take back with the other knight and move our queen, then there will be an f4 move later. So knight g4, I must admit, I haven't seen very often. Let's have a quick look at the Knight-H Hare Krishna game. Of course, another big game, another Sicilian defense. That's 3 out of 3 so far. But this time, it's a Taimanov variation. And now Queen c7. And Queen c7 has almost completely replaced a6 here. On a6, the system played, amongst others, by Fabiano Caruana to beat Veselin Topalov in St. Louis a few years ago. This sort of thing, and castles, and it turns out this is quite promising for white. Certainly it's an option that most black players prefer not to give white anymore. So after Queen c7, of course, you can chase the queen, but it will drop back to b8, and then you can go a6, and then you can get back to something near normality. So bishop e3, time for a6, a3, just stopping any of the bishop b4 variations, and b5. So, well, this system with bishop e3 and f3 and so on and g4 would work a little bit better if the black knight was on f6. As it is, white is probably going to go kingside, because after b4, pawn takes, bishop takes, there may be a weak a6 pawn we can have a go at, and the knight on c3, well, you can protect it with your queen if you want. So I think after b5 and a3, there's not much chance white's going to play queen d2 and castle. You might play queen d2, but you're probably not going to castle queenside anytime soon. So probably it looks as if something simple like bishop e2, but then we're turning into some sort of Scheveningen where black has not played d6 and may not need to. So that's also not a great transposition. Hard to see what is going for white with this a3 move. Very weird move. The other problem with a3 is that black can play bishop b7 and then knight e5 or knight a5 and knight c4. And then you have threats against b2. Sometimes you've got knight takes a3 ideas, and usually you finish up having to take on c4. And then after queen takes, black is quite often comfortable despite not having developed on the king side. Now, there was one game, a famous Keres game, that talked black out of playing this plan, but the just develop your queenside plan is quite respectable, and a3 has made it just that little bit more respectable. So I'm expecting Hare Krishna to forget about his kingside for a little while and concentrate on getting a knight to c4. So one more game that we haven't seen, and that is Noel Studer from the local area, Baron, against Romain Edouard. And it's a it's a Queen's Gambit, but c5 again. And this is what I think he was looking for yesterday as well, or similar. And after cd5, however, instead of taking on d4, which led to a variation where white was just fractionally better and Wojciech failed to achieve anything, he just takes back with the knight. And now we have a real semi-Tarrasch. This is a line which a number of top players, especially Kramnik, have been trying to prove is really very equal here. Yeah, back in the 60s, there's famous Polagevsky victory, which scared people out of this sort of system. But certainly the knight d7 idea is, and b6 and bishop b7 seems to keep things really solid. So b6, rook e1, bishop b7, rook a d1, rook c8, bishop back, and rook e8. I believe there's also some ideas based on queen f6, but perhaps not quite here. So rook e8, and white has to decide how to attack. You've got things like queen f4, and then sometimes queen f6 can be a decent answer. You've got moves like h4 just to prod the king side, and in some positions you get to go e5, but at the moment black's knight can come to f8, and as I mentioned yesterday, the old Larson saying, with a knight on f8, I never get mated. And here that seems fairly legitimate. One of the reasons White's pawn center is not as strong as it would normally be is because 2 pairs of minor pieces have already left the board. So it's harder to whip up a mating attack when you don't have, say, a dark squared bishop on b2 or something like that, and where you don't have another knight to jump in the attack. So the best you often do is to get a pass pawn on the d file, and generally black manages to blockade that fairly easily in most endgames. Occasionally you can get a bad queen and 2 rooks against queen and 2 rooks ending, but most of the time it's nothing much for black to be scared about. So these are our 4 games, and they're all quite tense. In fact, they're considerably more exciting than in the previous day, although we got enough excitement later on. And here, well, h3 by Studer, it was played quickly enough that I guess that's still his preparation, because both players have got more time left than they started with. And well, that's not surprising. This is more or less a main line of this system. So we're going to go to an interview fairly soon, but I'll just go back to Adams and Kamer, our top game, because we did have a few moves. Bishop e7 played, bishop c4, and immediately bishop e6. So if White takes on e6 and knight g5, we can usually play queen d7, and that should be okay. It's very hard for the white queen to increase the pressure on e6. And of course, you don't have the d5 square if you take on e6, but you don't have a great square for your bishop either here, because if you move it back to b3, you can't recapture with the a pawn. Moving it back to a2 is going to misplace a piece. So taking it seems to be more or less necessary. Queen d3, perhaps I'd be worried about knight d7, knight c5 then. So let's see. Queen e2, played queen e2. So that at least means that if you take on e6, you can follow with queen c4. So there are some small worries here for black, and I'm not sure that bishop e6 is really the go. But what? Yeah. So at some point, white is going to want to go bishop takes e6. I don't really want to move my knight to d7. That really, it'll force me to go knight f8 later, and I don't want to do that when they take on e6 and play knight g5. So I wonder about queen c8, if that's a handy move. Though you are defending your e6 pawn before it's even been attacked, which is a little bit of a pity. But yeah, queen c8 seems like a decent move. Kamer is actually using a bit of time. I'm pretty sure he wasn't ready for the a4 system. It hadn't been used recently by Adams, but look, when you've played for as long as Adams has, you feel like you've played almost everything here. Wojciech and Anton is becoming quite exciting, and Anton is still moving very fast. After knight g4, he played knight c3, h6, bishop f4, g5. So he has given himself the option of coming back to d2 here with the bishop. I can't really see any, well, bishop g3, of course. If he wanted to do that, he would have gone back to h4. But instead he's taken on c6. And when black takes back, then you can go to d2 without worrying about knight e5. Because I think if you played bishop d2 immediately, knight ce5 looks like it's very close to equal. So this is, well, messy, but Wojciech has certainly not been slow. Remember, we're in our first 15 minutes or so of the game, and Wojciech has used 3 minutes on his clock plus 10 45-second increments, 9 of them rather. So bishop c6, yeah, Anton still has 8 minutes more than when he started. So he is definitely barreling along. So Wojciech, well, he's run into a prepared line. It just doesn't look very scary. Knight has played something a little bit surprising after b5, but he played knight takes c6, queen takes. That avoids all these knight e5, knight c4 ideas, and queen d4. So the idea is if you go knight f6, then we go e5. If you go bishop b7, we may well castle queenside. Be definitely worth a thought. And it just stops the bishop on f8 getting out for a little while. Now, I suppose you can go d6, but it's not the sort of move you want to play in this line. You'd rather go bishop b7, rook c8, and bishop c5, and yet, at the moment, there's that g7 pawn that's a bit of a hassle. So, bishop b7 played almost immediately by Hare Krishna, and white has to decide whether to castle queenside. So, I'm tempted. I don't think a5 and b4 is going to come all that quickly. And of course, we have some pressure. Now, perhaps after castles queenside, knight f6, e5, knight d5 may still be possible to be able to take back with a queen on d5. That's not so silly. So, it's an interesting idea, right, which I will come back to. So Studer against Romain after h3, black played knight f6, and now because you don't have queen f6 anymore, queen f4 was played, and knight h5. And of course, after knight h5, this is like a tacit draw offer, because queen g4 could be played, knight f6, queen f4, and so on. However, there's a number of other options here for white. It's been known to hide the queen on h2, and also queen e5. It looks very, very awkward, but it's not as bad as it looks. But it does get in the way, because after queen f4, white was getting ready to go knight e5, and the queen takes away that square then. So here's the big dilemma for Studer. He's come into this tournament with optimism. He had a pretty poor rapid tournament, and then he lost yesterday a game. It turns out from the computer analysis he could have drawn. So and he was very, very close to making a draw after being completely lost, a piece down basically. And then he was a rook down, but when he became a rook down, suddenly he got some counterplay. Very exciting game for anyone who wants to have a look at the round one game. So Romain, on the other hand, is not having the greatest of tournaments, and I guess he's just thinking, well, okay, draw with black, it's not so terrible. I'm not, he started with 2 blacks, so I guess he thought, well, if I can get 2 halves on the board, then I'm set up for the last part. But Studer shows how ambitious he is. He went rook queen h2. And now there'll be ideas of knight e5. There'll be occasionally ideas of g4 and queen back to f4. And of course, there's the queen on h2 is extremely stupid. So there are questions about things like queen f6. But I think e5 might leave that knight a bit stranded. Probably not. So queen f6 looks possible. h6 played. So he's not scared about g4 and queen f4. And he's also not scared about knight e5. Well, since queen h2 has been played and they're both with their clock still at 1:30, I'm quite sure this has been seen before. I will be having a look at precedents a little bit later. But they're still, well, all in opening theory, they're move 18, and this position, because top players were playing it, got fairly deeply analysed. And queen h2 is an idea I had thought wasn't particularly threatening, but if the best response is h6, I'm not so sure. So we'll find out about that before too long. And well, still is a question of whether white can whip up anything on the king side. And is white really willing to go g4 here? I'm not sure at all. Once you go g4, you have the potential problem of that bishop on b7 being turned into a monster later. d5 doesn't look fantastic. In fact, after d5, you might even go e5 and put the knight on f4, and then your queen will be really horrible. So, yeah, there's real potential for the queen to be terribly out of play. At some moment, you will have to dislodge that knight and then race in with your queen to get it back into the game. So Studer is playing very ambitiously, and well, he said before the tournament that I was told from all sides that I'm making a mistake by becoming a chess professional, and that dreams of entering the top 10 in the world are beyond what is possible. So he said I always had my own ideas and pretty early learned to take my own path. Even though in Switzerland there are few top competitions and no real mindset for people to become a chess professional. I don't think that's just Switzerland. I think a lot of wealthy countries, the attraction of a chess professional being non-financial is often discouraged by well-meaning parents, amongst others. So anyway, he's giving it a go. Obviously, he's 23 years old now, youngest ever Swiss grandmaster, but the last 6 months not being very good for anybody's development has been a bit of a setback for him, and certainly he's taken a long time to warm up and show his best in this tournament. Though nearly drawing with knight h from a piece down is really quite impressive, actually. Okay, so Vincent Kaymer, after queen e2, simply played queen c8. He may well take with the pawn on e6 after bishop takes, though he has a new option if he wants of taking with the queen. But pawn takes, if you can cover d5, that's good, though remember that it's going to be very hard to play d5 under good circumstances because of the weakness of the e5 pawn and the fact that you could finish up with fixed pawns on e6 and e5. So not so encouraged. And Kaymer's used a lot of time. So queen c8, I guess, is over the board inspiration. He's now 20 minutes behind Michael Adams on the clock. Adams being a very natural player. And also, well, we have not had a move after bishop takes c6 from Wojciech. And the only thing I can think of is that he's actually thinking about taking on f4. Now, he's got two ways of taking back on c6, but if you take on f4, you might have a chance of getting an unopposed dark squared bishop, which could turn out okay. Then if you take on b7, I presume we can grab on b2, though that looks risky, but it may well be possible. So yeah, g takes f4 is just this new option. And Wojciech is burning time on this move. It's not often you get 3 recaptures, and he has to, well, really calculate if he takes on f4, and then use his positional judgment about whether to take back with a bishop on c6 or a pawn. And both of them have their attractions, but yeah, if I could get away with g takes f4, I would like to do it on the grounds that it could give you a really lovely position when you play bishop g7. But the only problem I can see, and it might be a big one, is after g takes f4, perhaps bishop d5 or something like that. But in any case, it could be very hard for white's king to find a safe, not white's king, sorry, black's king to find a safe spot. White's king, well, you probably go to the queen side. Actually, there's an f2 pawn hanging, so that even that's not so easy. And an open g file, I'm not terribly scared of the open g file, but maybe I should be. Eventually, Wojciech decided to take back with a bishop. So simply the healthiest move on the board, which he could have played immediately, but he really wanted to start calculating. And especially near the start of these sort of games, you feel as if you need to warm up. And so if you play 15 or 20 moves of preparation, you're actually not calculating much at all. And you often find that when you do have to calculate, you're not really ready for it. But here, Wojciech has been forced to think very early. And I think that he'll be sort of in calculating mode already. Now, bishop d2 is a decent move here, and it may well be what Anton wants to play, because if he wanted to go to g3, he probably wouldn't have taken on c6 first. So this one is going to be 2 attacks, I'd say. There's always an option for white to go knight d4, knight f5, which could be very nasty. And of course, black putting a bishop on g7 and a rook on c8 could have lots of pressure down that long diagonal. So that could also be very decent. Here, h3, I don't believe. Something like knight takes f2 looks absolutely fine. So you're going to have to move your bishop. And as I said, yeah, not g3, but d2 played, which neutralizes to some extent the bishop on g7, but not completely. So after bishop g7, black will be quite safe in going knight e5 later, because you're able to take back with a bishop. And I suppose the black king will probably have to head queenside sooner or later. It could stay in the middle, but there's a danger white will play h4 and open up the kingside. So that may not be so pleasant. There is a downside to playing h6 and c5, and that is that h4 move sooner or later. In our big game, Adams against Kamer, we have bishop b3 played, and that's agreeing to ruin white's pawn structure after bishop takes, pawn takes. Then black is almost a pawn up, because the 3 against 2 is not really worth much, but white has all the advantages of a Mora gambit. So white can play bishop e3 and rook c1. The queen will have to move again, probably. You can dump something on d5. So black will be a little bit reluctant to take on b3 unless black really wants to. Of course, castles here looks absolutely reasonable. Knight c6 may be good. Knight c6, maybe you're thinking about knight a5, maybe about knight d4. So if knight c6 takes, queen c4 doesn't look good at all. So I do think, yeah, this is okay for Kamer. Now, Adams, you think of Adams growing up in England at a time when chess was really taking off. England were a very strong country back in the 1980s, and yeah, Adams' formative years. I think he became a grandmaster in '89, and I'm pretty sure he got his final norm in the last round playing against me. But he actually comes from Truro, which is in Cornwall, and he said that it was a real obstacle for him living in the southern corner of England, because he quickly became the strongest player in his area, and then he looked around and there wasn't much in the way of strong opposition with no online chess. So it also made good quality coaching very difficult, and he said ultimately he never really had a coach. So, well, Adams, as I say, you don't think of him as being isolated, but each of the players in the field in their own way complained a little bit about their geographical position. And so, well, the worst by far would have been Hari Krishna, because he was in a just a village in Hyderabad. I think it was Guntur, sorry, 250 k's from Hyderabad. That's not near, in Andhra Pradesh. And fortunately for Hari Krishna, who was well, was a big talent very early on. I think he was world under 10 champion, and in 1996 he was indeed. So he's basically the same age as his opponent today, Arkady Naiditch. They played in junior tournaments together, and well, he was lucky his family actually moved to Hyderabad, and suddenly he was near a big city and he could get opposition, and his life became a lot easier. And you could say the same about David Anton, born in Murcia, but his family moved when he was quite young to Madrid, and it was much easier to play chess there than it would have been in Murcia. So we have had a move from Vincent Kaymer, knight bd7. So now if bishop takes on e6, pawn takes, the knight g5, we can probably play. Can we play knight c5, or do we just play knight b6 or f8? Certainly bishop takes bishop and knight g5 looks like the critical line here, but it's probably too easy to protect e6 and go h6 and then reconstruct where you want to put your pieces. My problem with bishop takes, pawn takes, knight g5, knight c5 is the move b4. Now, maybe I'm wrong about this because there is this annoying move knight b3. And actually that's just winning. So b4 is not possible, which means Kaymer can leave his knight on c5 and play h6. So this is absolutely fine, which leads me to think that white will not exchange on e6, although knight c5 is coming anyway, and then your bishop on b3 looks really silly. So the opening hasn't really worked so well, I think, for Adams. He's still, doing very well on the clock, but it's hard to find exactly what he should do here. You could start with knight g5, but after bishop takes bishop and h6, it feels as if it should be pretty good for black, followed by knight c5, or maybe you don't have to play h6, maybe you play knight c5 almost immediately. So all in all, I'd say Kaymer has equalized, our tournament leader, and well, it will be interesting to see how he goes. So Arkady Knightage against Pentala Harikrishna after bishop b7. White did castle queenside, so this is ambitious. Rook c8 and bishop d3. So right now we don't have bishop c5 because of queen takes g7. And we probably don't have knight f6 because of e5, although that could yet be playable. I'm not sure. Let's have a look. Knight f6, e5, knight d5. Now there is a move bishop e4, and there's some tricky stuff that I don't really believe it for black. Check, king moves, knight takes, bishop takes, and at best, I'd say black is going to be down a pawn. So I don't think this is working, which means no knight f6. Knight e7 doesn't look like it helps at all. And it's possible white's next move will be e5 anyway, in order to play bishop e4. So you may have to be a bit careful about that. There is queen c5 here. There's tricks with queen takes d7 and bishop takes b5, but they don't appear to be working. So let's see. This looks unbelievably dodgy, I have to say. But if queen takes g7, then we take on e3 first. Oh no, well, it doesn't really matter. So queen takes g7 is strange, and I don't believe this sort of attack is going to get anywhere. And I'd say it just looks like it's going to be a piece down for white. So that sort of thing is not working. And of course, if queen takes queen, bishop takes queen, black looks fairly equal there. It's hard to avoid the exchange of queens. So queen c5 could be good. That looks just equal actually. So I'm not keen on bishop d3 because it doesn't allow the queen just to retreat after queen c5. So Harikrishna, if he plays queen c5, I'd say he is doing pretty well. And yeah, well, there are probably other moves, but yeah, that looks the most consistent for sure. Okay, so in If we now go to the Studer game, we notice Studer has, after h6, gone for the quite extraordinary rook e3. It's a relatively common way to attack. You can either go for knight e5 and rook f3, but I think the idea here is more to play an e5 move sooner or later and make sure that after bishop f3, you can just take with the rook. So that neutralizes the white bishop rather the white squared bishop to some extent. Mind you, if you play e5 round here, I don't know where your knight's going in order to help with the attack. And if your knight doesn't move, then your rook can't help with the attack. So the only really good thing about e5 is that the knight on h5 is sort of trapped, and black may need to rescue it with something like g6, and then perhaps g4 and queen f4 could work out okay. So there is some attacking potential here, I'd say. And well, Studer is definitely going for it. Yeah, it's in some positions I'd like to go d5, but actually I'm a bit worried there'll be a back rank mate. The queen on h2 acts as a stopper for the white king. So I'm looking at some lines where, well, for example, let's say black does an absolutely neutral move like a6, then d5, takes, bishop takes, and rook takes, and now something like takes, check, rook back, and we just deliver mate. So white has to be a bit careful. When your queen's that silly on h2, all sorts of things can go wrong. And not that I think a6 is really going to happen. One good thing about of this from Studer's point of view is finally Romain is having a bit of a think, and he has to find a good move here. I suspect it'll be a queen move, whether to f6 or I'm not sure. I want to go to e7. Black's counterplay here is often based on b5, a5, a4, embarrassing that bishop on b3. Now, if you play a3 or something like that and it gets pushed back to a2, then there's a rook c2 idea. So black is looking for a bit of counterplay like that. So yeah, b5 may be a move here, and maybe a decent move. So back to Anton and Wojciech, and this game, yeah, is really unbalanced. We left it after bishop d2, bishop g7, of course, h3, knight e5, takes, and castles queenside. So Anton is simply going for it. I think he's probably just planning to go g3 and f4 around here. He might throw king b1 into the mix, but he wants to try to force the black king to go somewhere that's not so great. There is also an h4 move. If you could safely reply g4, I wouldn't be too worried. Although even there we can go f4, force you to take, and the bishop on e5 may find itself with some problems. So given a little bit of time, I think Anton can build up quite a good attack here with f4 and sometimes e5, but also just maybe forcing black to open the g file, which you could then take. And the bishop, the dark squared bishop, if the g file is open, doesn't have many very stable squares here. So it's very aggressive from Anton. If you have a look at his clock, it's still 4 minutes more than when he started. Just a reminder, the time limit here is 40 moves in 90 minutes, then 30 minutes to finish the game. But the increment is significantly more than usual. It is a 45-second increment. That was introduced initially to compensate for the hassle of having the plexiglass screen between the players, but it's also enabled quite an interesting time limit that, well, we could see happen again. I remember when Gibraltar was having 1 minute increments, and it did seem a little too much, but perhaps 45 seconds is the happy medium, and this could well be an idea to be adopted. In fact, the the Biel triathlon method has already been adopted in, I believe, some internet tournaments late last year. So it was possibly St. Louis, I think, might have used the Biel format. So well, Biel's experiments, sometimes they get taken up, sometimes not. I have my doubts about the idea of 4 points for a win and 1.5 for a draw, but let's see how it works out. It certainly isn't penalizing draws too much. So finally, Wojciech has made a move. He's 25 minutes behind on the clock, but he's played Queen B6, which indicates he wants to go queenside. And if Bishop E3, then he's just going to go Queen A5. Right now, I'm not sure if you really want to take that pawn on F2, though it's not impossible to run away after you take it. It does look very, very committal. But if that is a threat to take on F2, then it sort of slows White up in White's plan of playing G3 and F4. So there's some merit in it, and it does seem as if finally we've forced David Anton, the third seed, to have a think. Yeah, in different circumstances, this would be the game of the round, David Anton being the third seed, but he really hasn't had a good tournament so far. And Wojciech will be quite happy to have a sharp position against him, because when people aren't playing well, sometimes sharp positions are just what they don't want. They want something reasonably safe with 2 results. Hari Krishna, by the way, we left that one. Whoa. Oh, that was my analysis. Okay. Queen C5 was in fact played by Hari Krishna, and that's a very practical move. So everything can come off. I don't think Black can really be better in any of these positions, but it's also hard to imagine that White's got anything much. Lots of pieces off the board, no flaws in Black's pawn structure, and a very safe E7 square for the Black king. So swapping everything on C5 doesn't look inspiring at all. But remember, in this tournament, the players have to get to move 40 before they can offer a draw. So we will at least get to see how the endgame goes before the players shake hands. And as I believe Vishwanathan Anand found early on, when these rules were first introduced, I think it was a tournament in Sofia against Gadakamsky. It was just a drawn rook ending, but it's very easy to get flack if you have to keep playing. And Anand, I believe, actually lost a pretty well unlosable rook ending just by thinking, okay, well, I'll get to a position where I can make a draw, but it never quite happened. And once he was under pressure, didn't defend so well. So let's go back to Adams and Cayman, because we have had a few moves here. After knight b7, White went bishop g5. So the idea is, if knight c5, he may take on f6 and then the bishop on d5 and try and keep a piece there. So bishop d8 played. That way, if bishop takes f6, he can take back with the knight. But he's looking at bishop a5, or he's looking at bishop b6. If you dare play a5, you may find that pawn is in big trouble after a move like queen c5. So bishop d8, the only danger of that is that your d6 pawn could be a bit weak. But right now, well, rook d1 doesn't look that scary. Perhaps bishop a5 is possible there. Yeah, so, but rook d1 does seem consistent, at least. So Adams could also castle, and then after bishop a5, I guess, jump in with knight d5. But we will take with the bishop, and yeah, should be reasonable. Black will have to castle sometime. So after bishop d8, no, there's no immediate threats for either side. So I think, yeah, if White is going to show any advantage here, it's going to be based on attacking the pawn on d6. Just doesn't seem that scary, though. We could even put our queen on c6. I don't think it's going to be. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be anything scary. So I'm going to take a short break here. there's some technical problems with the interview. You saw them yesterday. They're persisting today, and so the stream is going to be rebooted just for a minute or two, and then I'll be back, and hopefully I can bring you the interview that was promised quite soon. So I'll just sign off for a few minutes, and we'll be back as soon as the technical problems are solved. So see you soon.